Hello, my dear friends. This is Rohini Moradi with Magic Inclined, and on today's show, we have wonderful guest Holly Laurel. Holly is a Reiki master, psychic, intuitive guide, and spiritual mentor. And although she was born and raised in New York, Holly is not your typical New Yorker. She's been exposed to all things alternative wellness from birth. Holly grew up with parents who brought her to full moon circles, women's groups, and her grandmother's crystal shop on the weekends. She always felt at home in the spiritual, holistic wellness world. But as a young adult, she resisted that side of herself. For nearly a decade, she worked in the corporate creative world of advertising until her personal journey of healing led her to the realization that she could no longer ignore her calling as a healer and space holder. After completing her Reiki training, Holly moved across the world to Bali, where she began working as a healer and teacher full-time. In her Reiki readings, she draws on the modality of traditional energy work combined with intuitive mediumship to help review and clear blocks and traumas, channel messages, and ultimately facilitate a greater self-awareness in her clients. With her grounded and compassionate presence, Holly creates a safe and sacred space that fosters insight and empowers her clients to discover the healing wisdom and agency that she believes resides within us all. So without further ado, let's go! Welcome to the show, Holly. It's so wonderful to have you here.
It's so great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh my goodness. For those of you, I guess nobody really knows this except for the two of us, but we've been trying to reschedule this for like 4 months now. And
wild.
Yeah, I think, didn't we do our initial recording in September?
No, you know what? It was before then because it was right before I moved to California. So it had to have been in like June or July.
So it's way more than 4 months. Oh my goodness.
Crazy.
Oh my, well, I initially lost the recording we did on my computer because I overloaded my computer. And then we've had rescheduling conflicts. We just went through the craziest snowstorm where power was out everywhere. I don't remember what happened before.
Fire season.
Yeah. So the elements have been pushing us to do this episode now. And
they knew that it had to be in 2022.
No, seriously.
Yeah.
I'm so excited. Those numbers.
Yes. Yeah.
Magic numbers. But also we just had a mini Reiki session.
Yeah.
Or intuitive Reiki session.
Yeah. Reiki reading.
Sorry, a Reiki reading.
So good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think we were meant to do the reading before we did the
I think so too. I think that the universe had bigger plans for us.
Yeah. It feels so good to do this right now.
Yeah.
So welcome. I'm so excited. Thanks for bearing with me and holding on.
I'm so happy and excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, let's start it off. Tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you come to do Reiki readings? How did you fall into the spirituality world or spiritual world? Or how did you find your gifts? All that stuff.
All that jazz. Well, I was kind of born into this world, actually. So my maternal grandmother, she was an acupuncturist and really just like a healer in her own right. She had a health food store in the 60s before Whole Foods existed. And then she had like a kind of new age crystal shop in the 80s and 90s that I grew up going to. She was way ahead of her time. And, she would have tarot readers and like metaphysical authors. And like every time my sister and I would go in there, we would get gifted a different crystal and we would learn what the crystal was. And she was just so ahead of her time. And, as a result, my mom kind of grew up in that space. And so both of my parents, I used to call them undercover hippies, because they had these corporate jobs and they would travel all over the world working, consulting for these big companies. And on the weekends, they would take me to like new moon circles and drum circles. And my mom was in this like women's group and my dad was in this men's group. And we just grew up in this like very spiritual households but it was we were all in the in the spiritual closet. Because I would argue that really it's only been in the last like 5 to 10 years that a lot of this work has become much more accepted and kind of mainstream and spoken about. So it was a really special childhood, but it was interesting because I have always been curious about any type of healing work, any type of intuitive psychic. I've had so many different readings and healings over the years. But I grew up with this kind of story that you can't really make money being a healer or working in the spiritual space. So I followed in the footsteps of my parents and I did all of that stuff on the side on the weekends. And I worked in advertising for a decade in New York. And it was really fun up until it wasn't. And it kind of like hit a moment of like, I just felt like my soul was kind of slowly dying inside. But I'm really grateful for that time because I feel like I learned so much about business and I learned so much about, creativity through a different lens and made so many like really amazing connections. But I got to this point where I was like, okay, I can't do this anymore. I thought that I wanted to shift into film production. And I was working with a coach at the time who was kind of like helping me figure some stuff out. And she was like, why don't you go get some Reiki sessions? So I went to a friend of mine who was like Reiki attuned, and I started having these sessions with her and they were really powerful. And at that point I had really started to connect with my spirit guides and build a relationship with them. And I was definitely stepping into a different level of like my own spiritual awakening. And I had a couple sessions with her where at that point, all of my grandparents had passed and my grandparents would come to me in sessions and it was really beautiful. And then I had one session. So every session I was like expecting my grandparents to show up and I would get really excited. And then I had this one session with her where it wasn't my grandparents. It was this spirit guide that I had started building a relationship with that came through. And the whole time she just kept saying to me over and over again, your purpose in life is to heal people. You're here to be a healer. Your purpose in life is to heal people. And I had kind of, the coach I was working with at the time, she had kind of said similar things. She was like, I think you're meant to work in this space. And I like laughed at her. I was like, no, like, no way. And so after the session, I kind of like came to and I was just like laughing and crying. And I was like, okay, I don't know what that means, but I guess I can't really deny this anymore. So I just decided to kind of lean into it. So while I was still working in advertising, I started doing my Reiki training, and it was really through Reiki that so much opened up for me. Like I've always been really intuitive, but it was like the floodgates opened up after that training. And I just leaned into it and I saved up enough money. I quit my job. I moved to Bali. I was in Bali for a while. And that's where I really I took a little time off and then I started offering sessions, and those sessions quickly turned into what I now call Reiki readings. And the rest is kind of history.
I think it's important. It's important.
Really cool. Yeah. Well, it's interesting, like being in this space. And I'm curious if you feel kind of similarly, like there are so many talented, gifted healers and intuitives. But what I found, and I think part of why I resisted kind of diving in head first, is that there are so many formulas, and there's a lot of people that I truly believe that every single living being on this planet is intuitive, is psychic, and has the ability to heal.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of stuff that gets in the way of us being in touch with it, right?
Yeah.
And I'm grateful for all of these people who have kind of stepped up and started teaching their approach and their methodology. But I feel like sometimes that keeps us in boxes, right? And so the reason why I decided to trademark Reiki reading was because I was like, I feel like this is a really unique healing offering that I offer. And so how can I kind of keep this, proprietary in a sense? How can I make sure that, like, I'm sure there are lots of people who give sessions that maybe look and feel similar or have similarities different ways, but how can I, stand in my own unique gifts? Because I want everyone else to stand in their own unique gifts,
Absolutely. And honestly, like in this world too, in the spiritual world where like, you don't know when someone is actually tapping into their magic or not, it's important to protect your own. It really is.
It really is.
Yeah. You can get really like burnt out quickly if you don't.
It's about those energetic boundaries.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you do is unlike anything I've experienced, and I'm so glad we got to do a reading right before recording this.
Me
so it's like, what do you mean Reiki reading? But I had this problem, and I'm not going to get into it, that was like causing a lot of stress in my body. And not only did I feel your energy with me, like I really felt you there with me. And I haven't felt that way with like distance Reiki sessions ever. But I felt molecules leaving my body.
Yes.
And the reading you gave me after, like searching through all like my vibrational frequencies and such, was like on point. I feel so inspired and so connected and so good right now. I've never experienced like what I did with you before. So it makes sense that you would want to protect that.
Yeah. Well, that just makes me so happy to hear.
I'm sure you hear it all the time though, right?
I do hear it a lot, but I it's interesting too with the distance Reiki, because before the pandemic, I was so resistant to doing it. I like didn't even believe. I was like, what? No, I don't believe people who do that. What are they talking about? And then it really like forced me to kind of embrace it and lean into it and figure it out, which is interesting because I feel like that was kind of a bit of a theme in the reading that we just had, but for everyone with the pandemic. And and when I did, I was like, oh, wow, this actually is just as powerful as in person. Yeah. And sometimes I would argue more powerful, because there's something about the safety that I think we feel being in our own homes and our own spaces and the comfort that allows us to open up in a different way. Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I do feel like, every time I have done a distance Reiki session where I'm conducting it, I feel like I can fall into it more deeply because I'm in my own space. Yeah. And it actually like falls under Einstein's like space-time continuum theory, where we can energetically travel.
Yeah. Well, that's what I say all the time, like to people who ask about it, who don't understand. I'm like, well, we know there's no such thing as time and space. We can like travel through it. Yeah. So that's Reiki.
It is Reiki.
Yeah.
That is
Reiki. Just energy. It's just energy.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, tell us about how it became from Reiki to the readings, because that's a very unique thing to do.
Yeah. Well, it was probably my first like official paying client who I worked with in Bali, total stranger. Like, I don't even remember actually how she found me. I think it was, when you live in Bali, at least where I was living, there are all these different Facebook communities for expats and people who are like living there abroad to connect. Oh. And I think it was in one of those communities, someone had posted asking about Reiki. And I was like, well, here are some 2 great like practitioners I know. I'm also a practitioner if you're interested. Like I was still kind of like nervous, like I wasn't fully sure I was ready to claim it. And she wrote back and she was like, I'd love to do a session with you. So I remember I made like a special playlist for the session, and I was like kind of listening to it on my way over to her, like kind of pumping myself up almost. And I was just like, you're a healer. You're a healer. You can do this. And it was awesome. And I was so present in the session. And before that, most of my sessions were with like friends and family and, people that I knew peripherally. And I love doing that so much, but I almost think there's something about when you have a certain amount of knowledge about someone, especially when you're just starting out in intuitive work, it makes you question yourself. Yeah. You're like, oh, is this coming through because I know this one little tidbit about this person, or is this actually an intuitive hit? And so there was something powerful about doing a session with someone I knew nothing about. And it was just, again, it was like the floodgates opened and just all this information came through, and there was so much power, and her guides were there, and she was feeling like multiple sets of hands all over her body. And I was like, okay, this is amazing. And this is not just Reiki. And, I told her the session would be an hour, and I think I was with her for like 2 hours because we did, almost an hour of Reiki. And then I just had so much was channeling through me after that I talked her through. And so that's when I was like, okay, I need to kind of adjust things. And it was also when I was like, this isn't just a Reiki session. This is special. And this is something that I need to really, I asked my guides for guidance. Like, what is this? What do I call this? What is the name for this? And so a couple of days later, Reiki readings came through, and I was like, all right, that's it. Thank you.
I'll take it.
Yeah. Done.
I love it.
Yeah.
So it's like it feels like a combination of mediumship and Reiki in one, where there's, when you go to like a psychic medium, you get to connect with your guides. And I think so, right? I don't know.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I don't know. I've actually never had a psychic reading. Oh, that's a total lie. I forgot. But yeah, that's really cool. You're like connecting to like a really special layer, within the universe.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yeah. It's fun. I'll have to say it's really fun.
So how is it like, do you do this on yourself ever?
So it's interesting because I teach, I call it intuitive Reiki, and I teach, I've studied under like Western practitioners and Eastern practitioners. So I teach both Eastern and Western Reiki because I think it's really important. Anytime you're tapping into a modality that doesn't come from your culture, like you need to understand where it comes from. You need to pay tribute to its roots and to the culture that it comes from. But I call it intuitive Reiki because I also kind of teach the Western aspects of it, and I teach how to tap Reiki to really open up your intuition. And my students will always, after their first attunement, they get homework to do self-Reiki. And they're always like, I don't feel anything. I don't think I'm doing this right. I don't understand what's going on. And I'm like, I got a secret for you guys. Like when I do Reiki on myself, it's kind of the same thing. Like I'll feel like physically, like I'll feel my hands tingling. And sometimes depending on what's happening, like I was working on throat chakra healing for a really long time. And so when I was working on my throat, like I felt the energy in my throat big time. But it's not like I'm doing Reiki on myself and all of a sudden I'm channeling and I'm getting all of these messages. Like it doesn't show up like that for me when I work on myself, which I think makes sense, right? Because I think it's hard to kind of be in this dualistic role of giver and receiver at the same time. You can't, when you're giving, it's really hard to fully surrender and receive. But, you know, I have my own ways of connecting. I wish that I could give myself a session and experience it the way that like I hear my clients experience it. But that's why I work with like my own, you know, I have my own team of practitioners and healers that I go see. I haven't necessarily found someone who does exactly what I do, but like I have a Reiki practitioner who I go to for just pure Reiki, and it's really deep and powerful and beautiful. And then I have someone else who I go to for more kind of like intuitive guidance coaching that I work with. So it's separate, but you know, it still works.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So how has this changed or influenced your life? How's it?
Oh my God.
I know it's such
I mean,
I feel dumb asking that, but I just wanted to.
There's no turning back. Like,
how did you come out of the spiritual closet?
It was definitely hard. Like I would say when I was living in Bali, I was still very much in it. And my time in Bali was cut short because of the pandemic. And
you were there.
I was there at the beach. Yeah, I moved there. I think it was September of 2019.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And then I was there until I think I came back. It was either the very end of March or April beginning of 2020. And I was there when it was all happening, and I was in my beautiful little bubble. And my dad was like, you know, messaging me every day and like sending me these news articles. And I'm from New York. My family lives in New York. And so I didn't fully understand or grasp, because in Bali, it wasn't really there quite yet. It probably was there, but like we didn't necessarily know or realize. Yeah. And so I was kind of like, oh, I'll just stay here and live in this beautiful little magical bubble. And if it means I have to quarantine for a couple of weeks in my villa, that's fine. Like it's all groovy. But I was on a tourist visa. And so the way that it works there is every 2 months, you leave the country, and then, you know, for a day or two, and then you come back. And there was one day, there was kind of a week leading up to it where I would get a different text every day from a different friend, basically saying, hey, I'm going back to my home country. And long story short, there was one day where it just hit me like, oh, I'm on a tourist visa. I have limited options. I don't know if I'll even be able to get on a flight back to the state. I was getting like emails from the embassy every day. So within 24 hours, I made the decision to leave, and I was on a flight the next day. So it's kind of crazy. But anyway, you asked about getting out of the spiritual closet. And in Bali, I could still stay in that closet with like my American friends, with my friends from back home. But I was in this beautiful, like spiritual community where like everyone was kind of open to all of these things. But when I came back from Bali, and in Bali was when I started doing these sessions, these Reiki readings, and really kind of embracing this. When I came back, I was like, well, this is my business now. And this business isn't going to like grow, and I'm not going to grow and thrive and expand if I don't announce this to the world.
Yay.
So COVID kind of forced me to come out of the spiritual closet in some ways.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we have to count the ways that it's actually helped us too, because a lot of bad and scary stuff has come out of it, but it's actually pushed people to be better, you know, and to really be themselves. At least that's what I'm seeing with people around me.
Totally. And it was interesting because it was this weird dichotomy of like being forced inside, right? But also like expanding.
Like inward.
Like really inward, but then also kind of like being forced out of this little bubble in a way.
Because our day-to-day was like halted, right? So we really had to go inward, and our root chakra was like severely impacted. It's like
Yeah.
It's like just kind of exploded everyone in a way. Like, oh my gosh, what have I been doing with my life?
In all of the ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
So here I am.
Welcome. I kind of came out around the same time too. It's my spiritual closet. Whereas it's scary announcing to the world that you're like into stuff that you can't see.
Yeah. Because I think also for so many of us, like so many of us have that witch wound, like
absolutely.
So many of us, and I've seen it in sessions with clients, and I've experienced it myself. Like we have past life trauma of being outed or, being burnt at the stake or, like ostracized for leaning into these gifts in the past. And so it's almost like this trauma that's resurfacing, this fear of like, is that going to, we may not be conscious of it, but like our body at a cellular level remembers that, right?
Absolutely.
Whether it's trauma from this life or a past life. So there's that fear of kind of like stepping out into the light. If I step out into the light, like that makes me vulnerable and exposed. But I do think it's a really amazing, I think there's a reason why so many people are stepping into spirituality and stepping into their own gifts at this moment, because I think it's the first moment in time where it's like, no one is going to be burnt at the stake or, attacked in the same way that we had, like, you would have been 100 years ago or throughout history. Like it feels scary. And yes, we are opening ourselves up in a very vulnerable way to a different type of attack, right? Like an emotional attack or whatever. But we still kind of have the strength of like what we're rooted in. And there's just this new movement in this really powerful, beautiful direction. I think it's an opportunity for like a deep healing for a lot of us.
Absolutely. It's really funny, like this, my family and I have been watching Encanto over and over again. Do you know about this movie?
I've heard about it and I haven't seen it yet, and I really need to watch it.
It's so good. But it's a Disney film, go figure. Yeah. But it's so good. And I'm not going to give too much away, but it does have that theme of being excited about one's magic and how special it is and how everyone's magic is so unique to themselves.
It's so unique.
Yeah. Yes. And I was reading this book. Can't remember it, but that's okay. But there's like this passage in it. Oh, it's The Akashic Field by Jim Willis, who's amazing. If anyone's like interested in really learning about the Akasha, that's the book. And any Urban Laszlo. But so in this book, Jim Willis is like a priest, like throughout his whole life. Like this is his career, and he's gone through all this stuff. And he's like, every time I read, these passages and these parts of the Bible where they believed in magic, they believed in this bigger thing, they believed in spirits, it always made me think, like, why aren't we allowed to believe in it now? Because that wasn't, like, when you look at the timeline of the planet, that wasn't that long ago.
No. That was the majority of history that we believed in that. Yeah.
So for a really long time, people were excited about magic and they would see more of it because they accepted it. They deemed it as a real thing.
Yes.
But now it's like we have to convince people, like, okay, so the atom, they thought the atom was like the smallest thing, but then they cut it up into pieces, and this is why we're not made out of matter. And like, you like really dissect to like make people believe again.
Yeah.
And so it's happening now. That's why so many people are like, well, I have this talent. I have this talent.
But it's so important, right? To like lean into like our unique gifts and talent, because everyone like there's a reason why we were born at this time. And also, no one else on this planet is going to have the same perspective or experience as you.
No.
And that is a gift, right? Because
Absolutely.
like through your unique perspective and experience and all of the traumas and the hardships and all of the beauty and the magic you've experienced, like that is giving you all of the tools that you need to step into your own magic and like guide others in your unique way.
Yeah.
And we can't lose sight of it.
No. And we have to really like hold boundaries around it. We have to really harness it and like keep it close to us, because there is such a thing as people who haven't learned how to tap in their own magic, like taking from that as well, you know? And it's not about this weird thing came up in our reading earlier, actually, where it's like grabbing onto stuff. So I'm not saying like holding on so tight where there's no like giving and receiving, but just being aware of it being with you, I think is really important, you know?
Yeah. Just like what we were saying earlier, you know, like the energetic boundaries of your own magic and your own gifts, because the boundaries are so important, right? Especially when it comes to energy and energy work, because I mean, what I love about Reiki is that I'm really just a channel, right? Yeah. So I'm not like using my own energy to like get into your energy. I'm really just a channel for the energy to work through me, right? Yeah. And I think that's what's so powerful and beautiful about it. Like when I hear about practitioners who are so exhausted after doing sessions, it's like, well, there's something off about that, right? Because we need to have clear boundaries between my energy and your energy. We don't want to get mixed up. Like that's where the power lies, in really like allowing your energy to pull what it needs and do the work that it needs to kind of like empower yourself and clear itself. Mm-hmm. I'm just facilitating, you know?
Totally. That is amazing. Well, okay. So what are some programs you have coming up? How can people get in touch with you?
Great question. Well,
what's going on?
I'm probably shifting away from intuitive Reiki trainings this year, but I will have more trainings later this year. I'm going to be starting actually a mentorship program working with people to help them identify their own unique healing abilities. It's, you know, it's people who are like, I know I'm a healer. I know I have gifts. I just don't totally know what that looks like or how to exist in the world. And so I'm really going to help them kind of find their light and let it shine and step into it. I also, you know, come see me for a Reiki reading in person here in LA. Thank you. Or virtual. Actually, most of my clients at this point see me virtually. I do work with clients in this soul mentorship program, where I would say it's part talk therapy, part intuitive guidance, some Reiki, some coaching to help work through wherever you're feeling really like blocked and stuck, and kind of working through past traumas to really step into your power more. And I have a retreat coming up this March in Joshua Tree, which I'm so excited about. We are diving all into divine feminine and divine masculine energy, and how to, this is actually perfect based on our session, but how to really bring them into balance. So we're kind of spending a day on, you know, where our divine masculine and feminine is showing up out of whack within us, you know, what needs to happen to bring it back into balance, and how the two energies can coexist within us. Because I think what I've seen so much is like we're either really far in one direction or really far in the other direction. Mm-hmm. And if we're far in one direction, we think to bring it back into balance, we have to kind of like pendulum swing to the other side, but it's not always about that. So we're going to be doing workshops. We're going to be doing group Reiki. We're going to be doing movement and fire ceremonies and moon ceremonies. And I'm so excited. So that sounds so cool. Yeah. So all of that info is on my website, hollylaurel.co. And you can connect with me on Instagram, where I do a lot of daily content and some special surprise group readings and stuff, at _Holly Laurel.
So cool, Holly. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. I want to do all of those things.
Yes.
I know. Please keep us posted when new stuff comes up too, because that sounds so
Oh,
cool.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so there are two questions I like to ask at the end
Yes.
of the podcast, and like they're both kind of big. So
Okay. I love big questions.
do you believe in good and evil? And whatever your answer is, why?
Oh, this is such a good question.
Sorry. I'm a jerk for doing this to people. I know it, but it's like, it's so cool to get the raw answer.
Yeah. I think that my position on this question has shifted over time. And I think that the way I'm going to answer this is that I believe in light and darkness. And I have experienced, what it feels like when I think of lightness, what it feels like to really come from a place of pure love, to experience pure love from other people. But I've also experienced darkness in the sense of like a lot of pain and shadow work. And I have witnessed some energies outside of this physical realm that definitely come from more of like a darker space. But I don't necessarily think that it means that they're good or bad, because I think that there's something to learn from like all of those, like both of those energies. And I think that in order to grow and expand, we have to kind of like work in the lightness as much as we're working in the darkness, and looking at our own shadows and kind of diving into that. And anytime like there is like something that feels bad or feels like a trigger, it's like, well, why does it feel this way? Why is this coming up? And I think ultimately it's about really bringing things into balance and finding how we can kind of balance the two. So that's my stance at the moment.
I love it. It's a beautiful explanation. Sorry for just like dumping that.
No, I love big questions. That was a great question.
And then last one's like a lot better and easier.
Okay.
But the last one is, what would you like to leave the listeners with?
Oh, what would I like to leave the listeners with? Well, okay, I will say this. At the start of every year, I do a little kind of meditation to feel into the energy for each month of the coming year for the collective. And in my newsletter every month, I talk about, I kind of give an energy prescription for, the energy of each month and what's going to come up in this month and how we can lean into it. So for this year, it really feels like the first half of, I'm not going to get into each month, but the first half of the year, I think there was a sense of a lot of kind of starts and stops, a lot of lessons that I think we've all been working on over the past few years are really kind of coming to the surface. And it almost feels like this kind of final learning, a graduation almost. And so it's going to feel a little bit frustrating, but it's also going to feel a bit like a whirlwind, going by really quickly and really fast. And then it kind of feels like mid-June through the end of the year is almost like the dust is settling. And all of a sudden there's a calmness and there's a new sense of ease. And there's all of these lessons are really kind of sinking in a new powerful way. And we have the time and space and clarity to kind of grasp and understand like this whirlwind that like tornado almost that we just experienced. So my guidance for the listeners is to really just, as much as you can, practice presence, patience, and perseverance through what is kind of coming up for you. The easier things will flow and be and go. And the easier the lessons will be learned and sink in. So that's what I'm leaving y'all with.
I love it. PPP.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, I didn't, that I just realized this comes from one of my teachers, Deborah Hammakamp. She always talks about practice, or I think she always says presence, patience, and perseverance. Yeah. So I can't take credit for that one.
Well, I still love it.
It's so
good.
Powerful. It's so powerful. And it feels, I think that was kind of just channeled through me. Like it definitely feels important for this year.
It really does. Yeah. And honestly, I feel like we all know that, but we don't remember it all the time. So like hearing that is important.
Yeah.
So thank you. That's a gift. It's a beautiful gift.
Oh, thank you for having me. This was such a gift.
Yay. This really was such a gift. Thank you for everything. Thank you for being on the show and the beautiful reading. Listeners, please book a reading with Holly. You will not be disappointed. And also go to her website and join her newsletter. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for being on the show, Holly.
Oh, thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
Pleasure was ours too. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we loved making it. If you'd like to learn more about Holly and her Reiki readings, please visit hollylaurel.co. And remember,